If you ask me, the hardest laser problem to solve is exhausting or managing your air quality. At least it has been for me personally. I'm currently on the 4th or 5th iteration of my own exhaust system that you can see right here, and I'm still not quite satisfied with the results. Which is why in this video I'm going to be comparing my current system with 3 air quality products from xTool to see if any of them have the potential to solve my ongoing ventilation problem. Specifically, we're going to be looking at the xTool AP2 filtration system, the IF2 exhaust fan, as well as the older model xTool 3-stage air filter, which is similar to some 3-stage air filters sold by other manufacturers. In addition to the testing, I'm also going to be talking a little bit about the pros and the cons of these various options, and at the end of the video, I'll also discuss what I plan to do with my own exhaust system here in my shop. And just so you know, xTool did send me the AP2, the IF2, and their 3-stage filter for free to review, and so with that said, let's get right into the tests. For each test, I measured 2 air quality metrics, the PM 2.5, which is basically a measure of the air particles of a certain size that are in the air, and also the VOCs. And according to the manufacturer of my air quality monitor, a reading of a PM 2.5 that's under 10 is considered good, and a reading of VOCs that is under 250 is again considered good. I'm sure there's probably a lot of nuance to this, but I mention it just as a reference point. And because I found that both of these metrics do fluctuate somewhat inside my shop even when I'm not running any job, I took a reading of each number immediately before running a test job and right after running a test job so that we can see the difference in addition to the raw numbers. And if you're curious, the test job that I'm running here is the same standard file across all products that I'm testing, and I ran it on a 1/4-inch plywood, and the cut job was set up to run pretty much continuously for about 3 minutes. And all tests were done on my xTool P2 CO2 laser. So with the stage all set, let's look at the numbers for the traditional exhaust fan, which is basically my current setup that's running an inline AC Infinity S8 exhaust fan. So this is the before picture for the PM 2.5, and we can see that it was a 2 rating for that, and for VOCs, it was a 144 before running the job, and now here it is after running the job, and we can see that the PM 2.5 did not change, it's still at 2, and the VOCs has actually dropped slightly to 135. But before we move on to the 3-stage filter, I think it's worth mentioning 2 things. First off, the results I got with this exhaust fan are not actually always this good. In fact, even with pretty much this exact same setup, I've had days where I've run it and it got so smoky in the room after a while that I've actually had to leave to let it air out, which is the main reason I actually wanted to test some of these other exhaust and filtration products in the first place. And to be honest, I'm not entirely sure why it's been sort of hit or miss with this setup, because if you look at it, it seems like it should work. Maybe it just gets progressively more smoky after I run longer or more cut jobs over a period of time, or, and maybe I'm reaching here, but it might have something to actually do with the direction of the wind outside. To be honest, I'm really not sure why it's been so inconsistent for me, so if you know something that maybe I don't that might be the reason why I haven't gotten consistently good results with my current setup, please do let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear about it. But in any case, I did all of the tests I'm showing in this video on the same day, and I tried to make the conditions as similar as possible so that hopefully we can at least get some sort of directional comparison between them. Anyway, the next thing I tested was the 3-stage filter. And with both the 3-stage filter and also the AP2 that we'll get to next, I ran a test both with a door open to allow some extra airflow into the room, and also with all of the doors closed so that we could see the differences in its performance in these 2 situations. So first off, let's look at how it performed with the door open. As we can see here, the PM 2.5 before running the test job is 2, and the VOCs is at 242. And then after running the job, this changed around to 2, so the PM 2.5 in this case stayed the same, but the VOCs went up. And so now we're seeing 380 for the VOCs. And then for my second test, I ran with the doors closed, and the before of this was PM 2.5 equals 2, and then before on the VOCs was 380. Then the after picture for the VOCs was 500, and for PM 2.5 it was 5. So both went up in this door closed test. And for anyone who may be concerned for my health, I did wear a respirator the entire time I was filming this just to be safe. And to be as fair as possible to this filter, I also want to point out that I'm running this test after having actually run the filter quite a bit over the course of several weeks. And so this is not like brand new condition, brand new filters. I did replace the pre-filter prior to running this test, but the other filters I didn't replace, and you can see that the top one here is looking a little bit dirty now. Okay, now for the AP2, and same thing here, we're gonna do a door open sample and a door closed test. So first of all, the door open version. You can see that the PM 2.5 before is 2 and the VOCs before is 178. Now, when we did it afterwards, when we checked afterwards, the PM 2.5 was still 2, so it didn't change in this case, and the VOCs was actually down a little bit. It went to 165, but I have an asterisk here because it actually did jump up to around 298 after around 5 minutes when I checked the monitor again. So it looks like in this case, it just kind of took a little while for those VOCs to register. And so I wanted to point that out because I got 2 different readings here about 5 minutes apart. And then for the AP2 door close test, what we've got here is a before reading of 1 PM 2.5 and VOCs of 298 before, and then here is the after picture. It was PM 2.5 still 1, so that again didn't change in this case, and the after on the VOCs though was 367, so that did go up a bit. And similar to the previous test, I also did check back on the monitor a couple of minutes after running the test and saw that actually both the PM 2.5 and the VOCs went up again to the numbers you see here. And similar to the 3-stage filter, I have run this AP2 quite a bit over the course of a few weeks prior to running this test. I did also replace the pre-filter on the AP2 before running this test, and you can see that both the pre-filter and the other filters below on the AP2 actually look pretty clean, at least visually. And before we move on to the IF2, which was probably the one that I was personally most impressed by, I know some of you might be wondering about the specific air quality monitor that I'm using, so let me briefly talk about that. Air quality monitors are kind of tricky because there is a huge range of different prices and a lot of different features and varieties of air quality monitors, ranging from $40 all the way up to $300+. And personally, I find it hard to believe that a $40 air quality monitor and a $300 air quality monitor are going to do the same quality of job when telling me whether or not my air is clean. So I did some research and learned that a big part of what makes air quality monitors good versus bad is actually the sensors that are inside of the monitors. And if you want more accurate sensors, you're typically going to have to pay more money to get a higher quality unit. But personally, I wouldn't even know where to begin to test and compare air quality monitors myself. And even if I had 10 of them in front of me, and I was able to use them and test them, it would be hard for me to figure out which one was actually the most accurate. And so in this case, I did some extra research and I looked at what was the top rated units from other places where they're actually testing some of these things side by side. And so I looked at air quality monitors that were highly rated by Consumer Reports and also Wirecutter. And I ended up buying this one here, which is the AirThings View Plus, which cost me about $300. And yes, that's pretty pricey, and it is actually more than I wanted to spend on something like this, but long term, I spend a lot of time in my laser shop, and if this can help me better monitor and manage the air quality in here, then I think it's probably gonna be worth it. But with that said, now let's go ahead and talk about the IF2. So here's the before picture on the IF2. As you can see, the PM 2.5 was at 18 before running the test, and the VOCs was at 125. Then after running the test, the PM 2.5 was still 18, so it stayed the same, and the VOCs actually dropped down quite a bit to 78. And after 5 minutes or so, I actually checked back at the monitor, and the PM 2.5 and the VOCs actually had both dropped further, being at 2 for the PM 2.5 and VOCs of 46, which is quite a bit lower than when it even started. And after running this test, I actually realized that I had the IF2 running at only 3 out of 4 possible power settings. And so I increased it all the way to the 4th power setting, which is the highest it can go, and ran the test again. This time for the before picture, I had a PM 2.5 of 5 and VOCs of 225. And after the test, the PM 2.5 was the same at 5, and the after dropped quite a bit again to 155. And just as before, I checked back at the monitor again after letting the fan to continue running for a couple of minutes. And as we can see here, the PM 2.5 stayed the same, but the VOCs did again drop down, which of course is a good sign. Now let's talk about some pros and cons of these various options. First of all, my traditional exhaust fan that I'm running, which is the AC Infinity S8 again. Even though it's not perfect, this setup works pretty well for engravings. For example, I engrave quite a bit of slate like this, and for something like that, it actually works fine. This doesn't produce a lot of smoke and dust, and so for something like that, it seems to work okay. I also like that this exhaust fan, as well as the IF2, are a one-time cost rather than an ongoing cost like you get when you need to deal with replacement filters. And this traditional exhaust fan also works well with conventional ducting like you've seen here in my shop that you can buy at places like big box stores. And this is especially nice if you have my situation where I want to be able to connect multiple machines to one ducting setup. And the big con is that despite despite working well for the test in this video, this traditional exhaust fan has turned out to be a little bit hit or miss since I've been using it over the course of several months. Some days it seems to handle the fumes pretty well for even cut jobs, but other days it seems to not handle it as well for some reason. I'm not really sure why. And then the air quality in here gets bad, and sometimes it even gets so bad that I have to let it air out before going back to work. Now let's talk about the AP2 and the 3-stage filter. Now, even though these two things are different and they performed differently in our tests, I want to talk about them together because they basically represent the same idea and have a lot of the same pros and cons. So pro number one is it's better than no exhaust solution at all. The AP2 does seem to perform better than the 3-stage filter, which is not surprising given the additional filters and the build quality of the AP2. And I also wanted to mention that all the tests I did in this video had the filter venting directly into the room. And personally, I think the best application for a filter system like this is actually to clean the air before also venting outside. My house has neighbors nearby, and I also vent out directly into my own backyard, and so I like the idea of at least partially cleaning the air before pumping it outside. And in fact, I did play around with hooking the AP2 up to my P2 and then connecting the exhaust port of the AP2 to my larger duct system, and I don't know yet whether I'll go back to this long term, but I do like the general idea of cleaning the air before venting it outside. Now for the cons of this sort of filtration system, in my personal opinion, I didn't think that the 3-stage filter or the AP2 cleaned the air thoroughly enough that I would feel comfortable venting it directly into my shop, especially because I cut quite a bit of plywood, which is very smoky. And of course, you have to monitor, clean, and also replace your filters, which is added cost, some added work in order to keep these things up and running. Speaking of which, there was one feature of the AP2 that really annoyed me. When the pre-filter got all dirty and clogged up, it had a little alert light that came up and stopped the machine. And in theory, it sounds like a good idea to have some sort of alert system to let the user know that the filter is dirty or clogged up. But for me, this happened right in the middle of the cut job, and this does entirely turn off the AP2 and the fan that's built into it. And so the shop got filled up with smoke by the time I turned the laser off, and I had to open the doors up and let it air out before I could get back to work. And maybe xTool has some sort of warning system that lets the user know in their own xTool Creative Space software that they're about to turn the AP2 off before they do this, but I was running Lightburn, so I didn't get really any heads up before it shut the thing off, which is why I had the not ideal situation of my shop filling up with smoke. Now let's talk about the IF2. This worked really well in my testing, and it worked better, in fact, than my traditional AC Infinity exhaust setup. And this is despite the fact that the ducting setup was actually quite a bit better for the traditional exhaust fan. As I understand it, the ideal situation for ducting is for there to be minimal bends and for it to basically go up and out. And that is what I had for my traditional exhaust fan. But for the IF2, as you can see, I had a sharp bend and then it went down and sort of wound around in order to get it out and under my garage door here. But even with this less than ideal ducting situation, the IF2 still performed better than my more ideal ducting setup with the traditional exhaust fan. And if you've seen this visual on xTool's website where it sort of shows the more traditional inline fan, kind of like an AC Infinity fan on one side and the IF2 on the other side, at first I was a bit skeptical of this, but there seems to be at least some merit to it. And as far as I can tell, the main difference here is that the IF2 has much more powerful suction, despite having a lower CFM number. As a reference point here, my AC Infinity S8 inline fan has a CFM rating of 807, which is really, really high. But the IF2 has a much lower CFM rating of 140. So to me, this suggests that when running something like a desktop CO2 laser like the xTool P2, the pressure rating of the fan is actually quite a bit more important than the CFM rating, which is basically what I'd been going by before. So this is an interesting and I think useful lesson learned here. Another thing that might be a pro for you is that the IF2 is quite a bit smaller, so it has a smaller like desk or wall footprint compared to something like a traditional AC Infinity or other brand axial inline fan. But for me, that's actually a bit of a con, so let's move on to the cons list for the IF2. The reason the size is a con for me is because it basically makes it impossible for me to connect this small fan to my much larger 8-inch ducting size that I have set up here already. At the same time, I understand that xTool's typical customer is probably going to be running one or maybe a couple desktop size lasers, and so I can understand why their customers will probably like this size IF2 fan better than a big sort of 8-inch style fan like I have here in my ducting setup. The IF2 is also somewhat pricey. At the time of recording, it sells for about $180. Now, compared to my AC Infinity S8, which costs about $160, you're paying about $20 more for the IF2, but again, it performed better in my testing. And I feel like I'm still in the early days of trying out these various xTool air quality products, but at least for the IF2 specifically, I think if I was buying just one exhaust fan, just imagine for a moment I didn't have any exhaust fans at all and I wanted to just buy one, then I would probably be pretty happy paying an extra $20 for the IF2 versus the S8 that is the one that I have right now, assuming I didn't already have all my ducting set up. And that brings me to the final part of the video, which is what I plan to do in my own laser shop for my ducting and exhaust situation. Number one, as context, I did recently purchase a brand new, fairly expensive laser, and I haven't received it yet, but it does have an exhaust fan built into it, so I will probably test that out before landing on my long-term exhaust setup for my shop. And number two, if after getting that new laser, I decide that I still do need an inline exhaust fan to use in addition to or instead of the one that's built into the machine, then I'm probably gonna start looking for an 8-inch exhaust fan that has more pressure like the IF2, but I don't think I'm actually probably gonna use the IF2 because if I did, I would have to redo all of my ducting, which is a ton of work. At the moment, I'm not really sure what, if any, 8-inch exhaust fan I can find that will give me more pressure like the IF2. Number three, in the meantime, I'll probably continue to use the IF2 hooked up to my P2 when running cut jobs, but I'll probably just use my existing setup with the AC Infinity fan when I'm running simple engravings like those slate example that I showed you a moment ago, where there's not gonna be a lot of exhaust and smoke produced. And that's really just so I don't have to redo the connections for the time being. And fourth and finally, I may try running the AP2 and the IF2 together on some cut jobs to see if running them in combination gives me the best of both worlds. So that's my plan for now. If you have any better ideas or can think of anything that I should try or do better, please do let me know, because I'm actively trying to learn more about this and do a better job managing the exhaust and air quality in my shop. So feel free to let me know thoughts that you have. And otherwise, thanks for watching this video and making it this far, and hopefully I will see you in the next one. Bye now.